teacher, and yeah, think about how we can extend these to our own education settings. But without much further ado, I can pass it on to Mr. Finley. I'll make sure he has all the permissions he needs. Do you have co-hosting permissions and stuff yet?
Yes, he does.
Great. All right. So thanks again, Vernon, for joining us. And so whenever you're ready and able to jump in, pass the mic on over to you. I think you're still muted.
Now I'm unmuted. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I thought I was just listening today. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Welcome everybody. Happy to see you here today. And I guess what I'd like to discuss, or what I'd like to talk about, is the way that language is used, or kind of an appropriate way of asking about language things and interpretations and things like that. Back when the culture committees were getting started here on the Flathead Reservation, I used to sit in on with some of the elders as they would be going through their discussions, and they were talking about cultural preservation, but they were all fluent speakers, so they would be speaking in the language, and I didn't know the language that well, so I was just picking up words here and there, not really understanding the full context of the conversation. And one of the speakers there noticed that, and so she addressed the rest of them and said, I think maybe, since there was myself and a few of my friends, and since they want to sit in on these meetings, maybe, we should, I should start some language. I'd like to start some language classes and teach them the language so that they can understand what's going on. And here, and so the elders thought, yeah, that's a good idea. You go ahead and teach it. And so she started our classes, and myself and some of my friends were taking the classes, and we all knew different levels of, different numbers of words, and one of my best friends was conversant in the language. He wasn't really highly fluent, but he was conversant in the language. And so we'd kind of have a lot of fun with it as we was taking the classes. And we started doing things like, coming up with slang, the word cupsin, for example. The word cupsin means what. It's like when you're asking a question, it's either what or why. If you're asking a what or why question, the word that you would start with is cupsin. And and if you're looking way up high, we're talking about something that's way up high, like in the sky or way up there. That word for that being up high is nata. Okay, so we would come up with slangs like, cupsin nata, like, or what's up, and which makes sense in English, but didn't make any sense to the Kootenai speakers. And we come up with a few other things like, use the words for no and sweat to say no sweat. And the lady who was teaching us, she thought we were pretty funny, and she would kind of laugh about it and stuff, but she was, well, you should, that's really not the way that you'd say it, but, and so one meeting, the elders called us back and said, okay, so what have you guys been learning? I want to hear what you guys have been learning. And so we kind of started throwing out some of these slangs that we came up with. and thought we were pretty funny. And they got pretty upset. They got pretty upset with us. And I remember one of the ladies stood up and was shaking her finger at us and saying, you know, I'll take my language to the grave with me before I'll listen to you speaking English using Kootenai words. And so that and she turned to the one who was teaching us, and she was told her, you teach them right. You know, you teach them to talk right. And so correctness in the language kind of became a thing after that, on making sure that we speak correctly. And so after that time, many of the people who started to try to teach the language assumed that the correctness meant correct pronunciation. Now, in Kootenai, pronunciation is pretty important. There are some sounds that are non-English sounds, you know, which is an unvoiced L. You know, it's like if you think about L using your voice. Oh, well, instead of saying the L, if you didn't use your voice and you just held your tongue the exact same way as an L, but blew air out both sides of your tongue, that's a sound, you know, and the rasping sound right above your tongue. And then there's a difference between a K sound and a Q sound, depending on where it's set in your vocal tract. Like right above your tongue, if you make the K sound, the K, right above your tongue, that's a K. But the Q represents the same sound, but it's further back in your throat. So K and K. So now the sounds are, you know, kind of important in the Kootenai language because because Akash, you know, is different than Akash, which is different than Akash. You know, those are three completely different things. One is a gunny sack, one is a cloud, and one are gloves. So, so the pronunciation is important, but that isn't only what she was talking about. She was talking about, you know, Kootenai language, the way those elders spoke, they always spoke like in metaphor, you know. The way that the language is used was always a there would be a literal meaning to what you're saying, but then there also was other subtexts or other spiritual meanings or other kinds of meanings that could be inferred from what you were saying. You know, like for example, if I was to tell, you know, he was talking about something or asking me about something, and I wanted to tell you, it's none of your business. And I would say, you know, Hinflitum Sakini. And Hinflitum Sakini would mean, you know, it's none of your business. But if you took the words and translated them literally, it means you have no smell. So there was ways of using the language that's what she was talking about in speaking the language and using it correctly, because when you speak your language, it's not just the human beings, you know, the way that the worldview happened, the way that the worldview was it was such a spiritual culture that they would you know everything was you know had a spiritual nature to it. And so for example, when you're speaking your language, it isn't just the human beings within earshot that are listening to you. It's all of your ancestors, are there, present, listening, all the way back thousands of generations to the beginning of time, that are listening to you. So the words that you use and the way you carry yourself was very much always with that kind of an awareness. Okay, so now you look at today, what some of the things are about, well, the way things are, from the Western view, it's with the assumption that we as human beings are in control of everything. And in the old school traditional Kootenai perspective, it wasn't that way. There was an acknowledgement that, we're the last thing to be created here. And so we're the youngest brother, and we must carry ourselves in the presence of all of it. We must carry ourselves that way. And it's all here to help us to survive. And it's all one big system that is all interconnected together. So when you think about the difference now, a really good example of where I'm leading to with all of this, to make a short story long, where I'm leading with all of this is like when you want to say something in English and you say, well, how would you say, let's see, I wanna teach my kids some self-affirmation type of statements. So what would I say? How would I say, I'm powerful, I'm strong, get them to say those kinds of things so that they're, in traditional Kootenai perspective and the way that you carry yourself, you would never say that because of what I just said about who's listening. You carry yourself in a humble way, and not as if you're on top of the world, or you carry yourself as if you're the last to be created, which you are. And so, even though in Western culture it would sound pretty good, it's kind of self-affirming, it's kind of saying, yeah, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna be successful, I'm gonna, Western view, we like to get people to say, to really brag, so there was some very definite no-nos from the Kootenai culture. You don't brag. I know that in one of the traditional views, or one of the traditional things is always, the word for competition is hasluitsnam, and so people, since in recent generation or two, have come to translate that word as for gambling, because in old time ways, hasluitsnam was actually a competition, whether it's a mind competition or a physical competition or a guessing competition, or predicting kind of competition, or whatever kind of competition it was. There was always a wager was always a part of it. The wagers, were a part of every single competition that took place, because if you risk your material things and lose them, that has nothing to do with your value as a human being. Material things come and go, and like they say, you can't take it with you. So those things, you're either more or less comfortable while you're here, but it has nothing to do with your worth or your value as a human being. Um, what kind of material things that you have. So there was a wager with every competition. Now, when we think about, a lot of the things in getting back to the language part of it, a lot of the things in the Western culture, that sound really good. We often get requests, and I'm sure we're not the only ones that do. I'm sure every tribe gets requests like, you're going to have a conference and our theme is this. And how would we say this in the language, or there's a tendency to come up with something in English that sounds really good in English, and then you go to the native speaker and you say, so translate this into the language so that we can, whatever the purpose, whether you're demonstrating cultural sensitivity or whatever, or what you think you're doing. It's that's not the proper way to do it. The way to think about it would be to talk about the concept. There's a concept of togetherness. We want this group to kind of gel together and come together and to support one another. How would we approach this type of a setting or this type of an issue from within your culture? What would be more important in Kootenai culture would be, so how do we help one another? How do we, everything that we did in our traditional culture, we did together and supporting one another and helping one another to accomplish it, and not for individuals to stand out as I did this or something. It was always showing support for one another. So and not only support for those that are here, but like I said, keeping in mind all of the previous generations. So you can kind of get a sense of the different worldview that comes from all of that. And so the words that are chosen from that worldview are different than what we would use in English. There are certain words that we kind of substitute for an English word. Upcha. Upcha means to know or to see, or to notice. Or it's used there's a concept that kind of incorporates all of those. That isn't just to know. It isn't just to see. It isn't just to understand. It's a combination. It's kind of like a combination of all of those and a little bit more. And it's more just because of where it comes from within the Kootenai mind, the traditional mind. That's what upcha is, and it has to do with, the cha part kind of is an indicator of your breath. Unupchanisni, I know you. I know you. It would be the way that would be translated. I know you, but what its meaning is, there's more to than just, oh yeah, I recognize you from, I recognize you from the workshop, or I recognize you because I see you at work, or I recognize you, but whatever way. It's like I said, the ha part has to do with the breath. That means, we've shared breath you know, we've been in the same presence, and our breaths have mingled, and I have breathed in some of your breath and you have breathed in some of mine. And at that level, you know, that's what it really means to know somebody, you know. It's and so they'll say, you know, it means, oh yeah, I saw you, you know, or I know you, or you know, and it's all those things that are kind of together. But anyway, that's kind of getting off track a little bit here. Sorry, but you know, the main point being, whenever you're looking for translations, and which is, and I say translations because that's the request that you get most from schools and from teachers. How do I say, my name is, you know, to put on top of the paper, and what page number? How would I put page number on there? And how would I, you know, and some of the things that, you know, some of the stuff are simple enough that we can just directly translate. But a lot of things you have to be careful when you get more into constructs, especially feeling or emotional type of constructs, then you're kind of treading on some areas that you really should discuss with speakers about. So is this concept spoken about? Is it appropriate to speak about it? And if so, how would it be approached? How does this fit into the culture? Is it something that even happens, you know? And because some things you don't speak about because you give it strength, you give it some power by speaking about it. So there's just so my encouragement for all of this is to be all right in helping to preserve native language, and also in incorporating language into your class, into what you're doing, then you really should consider and think about the construct itself that you're asking about, and then discuss that with the speakers. Is this even a construct? And if it is, what is its contribution in the culture, and is it appropriate to be speaking about it? And even saying, you know, in Western society, you know, in Western culture, it sounds really good if we say this, you know. Is that something that would even be appropriately said in your language? You know, and having those types of discussions will get you a lot further into the real cultural relevancy of what you do with your language teaching. But that was the main thing that I wanted to get across today. And then wherever the discussion wants to lead, you know, that we can go there. So Michelle's biting her nails so she could throw something in there.
I will ask a question. So I guess when you're teaching the language, is that worldview kind of like, do you find yourself kind of educating on that worldview simultaneously to educating on the language? Do those things kind of happen hand in hand?
Excellent question, Michelle. Thank you. I knew you'd have a good one. You know, for years, since the 1970s, a lot of our tribes, you know, I went to language conferences since the 70s, and all the tribal languages. I mean, we all know our colors and our numbers and our greetings, and you know, but it was about 2000 at one of the conferences, one of the old ladies that got it. And everybody who always goes to these conferences and brags about what they're teaching and how they're doing their classes and everything. And at one of the conferences, one of the ladies, old lady, stood up and said, you know, well, I've taught the numbers, I've taught the colors, I've taught animals, I've taught all of the foods that we eat, I've taught all these word lists, and I haven't produced a single speaker. And it kind of stunned the rest of us. And when we had to look at in the mirror, we realized, well, actually we haven't either, you know. And so a curriculum came along that started to work, and through all of this time there was different methods that come up. You know, there was TPR, total physical response, TPRS, total physical response, storytelling, you know, grammar and translation, the natural approach. I mean, you could go on about all the different, and every single one of those approaches, they all said, we're the answer, this is the way to teach the language. And so everybody would jump on that bandwagon and try to do that. But if you really look at it, and you look at all of these methods are good, but if you they're each of them are good at a different stage of learning, at a different part of learning the language. And so if you took all of them and applied them, you know, in the very beginning when they're trying to pick up meaning, TPR is very good for them to start really internalizing what the verbs are and how it's used and how it, you know, how all of that is used. But you know, and then there's you know, the natural quotient, then the storytelling. You know, I mean, storytelling is so traditional that, you know, going through a story with all of it, you see a lot of it, and then sitting down and writing it down and going through translating the grammar and you know, putting up the grammar up there and explaining the rules of how the patterns work. And all of these have their value at different stages of it, you know. So so in going through all of that, you know, it was like, well, in order to really get it across, you know, you have to kind of adapt your own. So then, and there are no materials, or there really weren't any materials. And in some of the languages, you know, in a lot of the languages, the teacher is the one, you create your materials. If you're going to be a Spanish teacher, there are tons of materials already available out there, curriculum available to you and everything. But the native languages, there's, you know, you got to kind of create your own as you're going along. And so trying to come up with one and know these different appropriate methods for the different stages, that was tough, you know, that was tough. So they adapted one that was kind of working for Spanish and then had some success with it. I started actually getting speakers coming out of the results of that. The issue was the Spanish, it's pretty close to English, you know, I mean, in structure and everything. So, so the concepts that were being used to teach and the way that it was being taught didn't really fit for the different levels of language learning, especially in Kootenai, you know. I mean, some of the things in a level 1 Spanish curriculum are actually, you got to be pretty advanced before you can come up with that stuff in Kootenai language. So and that kind of stuff. But they started having some success, and once they started having some success, then it started spreading pretty quickly. And so they was doing a lot of the things that was producing speakers. Now, I went to one of the conferences where some of the emerging speakers were actually doing keynotes in Salish, and they were speak, they'd get up and they would speak and they would, you know, and I knew these guys and they didn't know Salish as we were growing up. And now there they were delivering a keynote in Salish, you know, and I was impressed, you know. I thought, God, we gotta adapt that curriculum to what we're doing, you know. And I was sitting with a couple of the Salish elders and was, you know, and listened to one of the keynotes. And I turned and told, you know, the elder lady, I told her, man, you know, that is so impressive. That, you know, that man, they're killing it, man. That is great. Isn't that great? And she looked at me and she said, I think I can figure out what they're trying to say. And it dawned on me. I went all the way back to getting bawled out in our first language classes because they were speaking English, putting the words together in English way, but using Salish words. And I thought, wow, you know, since that time, there are others who have recognized all of that and said, okay, now you know, you've got a lot of language in you and everything, but now we got to start making sure that you're using it correctly and that you're using it from a correct cultural context. And that's kind of the focus of, you know, where they're at now. But that's kind of where we started with, you know, saying, all right, now make sure that as you're learning, you're also learning the correctness of it, you know, that you're using it in a good way. So yeah, so that's a long answer to a short question. But, yeah, thanks for the question though. That kind of gets at the heart of what, you know, what I was talking about. Well, looks like Julie has something. No? Okay. You just had that look like he was about to ask a question. Matt.
Sure. I'll throw you a question. So we kind of see a lot of resources that can kind of get speakers to that first and second level of language knowledge, knowing like the colors, the animals and stuff. And then some people kind of go on to that next level of like being able to use the language in various contexts like you're talking about. And then kind of once they get to that point, they seem to be really embedded and then kind of take on other cultural um, assignments, or not assignments, but like have that right bestowed upon them, gifted, transferred to them. What do you think about like, I guess how that works out? Like it's one thing to say like in school, if you learn the language, you'll graduate with an A and you'll get this special mark on a piece of paper. But at the same time, if these people invest the time to learn the language, which lends itself to the cultural ways, they sometimes like are asked to take on special roles, like being able to bless the food at a, you know, at an event. Is there like space? Is that like an okay thing to like kind of promote to students? Like, hey, learn the language, get an A, but also like, you know, work your way into our culture and be a knowledge keeper. You don't have to be an old elder to be a knowledge keeper. You can be bestowed these rights as a young person. Like, is that okay to do in school? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You guys were listening good. Because, you know, what we do, and that's kind of an assessment of our program that we have. Not not that we go out there and ask and put it out there, but through observation, are we doing this? We have an apprentice program where we got a few of the speakers that are starting to get up to kind of an more advanced level. And just by just the way that They learned it the way that they're doing it, the way it's instilled inside of them. They naturally step up at the community gatherings. They naturally help out where they should. They naturally accept a cultural role. That has never been a requirement of our program that they do that, but they have all just kind of naturally progressed to that. So yeah, so I think, if you're doing it right and you're doing it from that's a good test to see whether you're really instilling the cultural values in what you're teaching, um, because there's also folks out there who are kind of learning, okay, I learned how to say first person, how to use a verb in first person and second person and third person, how to ask the questions, how to make the commands in all of those contexts, and using transitive and intransitive verbs, and and so kind of building that base. But you got to keep in mind that all of those concepts are from a Western perspective, and the content that you're teaching in getting them there has to involve, the values of the culture, the values of the togetherness and what we do for each other, and just the connection with each other and the connection with everything before us, and everything ahead of us. So that, so yeah, just keeping an eye on that, and because teaching those things, first person, second person, third person, I mean, all of the ground, having those as kind of a framework that you're kind of teaching to, it's not, it's good. It gets people to a level of comfort with trying to speak, with using the language. But the content that you getting there is so important to make sure that the as they're getting there, they're also picking up the appropriate cultural worldview and the cultural where they're at in reality, where they're at in their places in all of this. So without, like I said, and a good, and we kind of stumbled on that by accident, but we just kind of realized, oh man, the apprentices are stepping up. The apprentices are, in the community things, the apprentices are stepping up. That's never been a requirement, So yeah, good question. Thank you. Thank you guys. You guys are good. Do I see something in the chat, or was that? Oh. Sign in for renewal units. Okay. Not a question. All right.
Hey, Kona,
Hey.
hey.
How are you?
Oh, Diane, just not so much of a question, but just good words and reinforcement on of what you said, because we get that request a lot. Doke in the how do you say this? How do you say that? And just again, reinforcement on what we did with greetings when we were in Missoula last week, when Michelle helped with the recordings. And just like I was telling her, we don't necessarily have a word for good morning or good evening and those kind of things. And we can put those words together just like you said, but it doesn't have that meaning from our cultural worldview.
Yeah.
And so the example that I always use is the word shunga kada. And one time somebody asked, how do you say hot dog? How do you say hot dog? But our word for a dog is shunga, and then our word for hot is kada. And I suppose you could put it together to make hot dog, but if you look at the opposite side, or our word for hamburger, tano yuk bomb, meat that is ground up into small pieces is the real translation of what that would be. So again, just good reinforcement. We have to be careful on doing those translations and those fancy slogans that they want to come up with, posters and whatnot, and put in the schools. It's we got to be careful. So again, good words. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Those are exactly the issues that, that we deal with too, coming up with, I mean, like, you know, sandwich, that could be a vulgar word, so just different things, with it's, yeah, there's a lot of consideration, and I mean, and I hate to be discouraging because there are people who, I mean, because you have a teacher who really wants to do it, who really wants to do it right. And they come from from an English language perspective that really this sounds good, and, but, our elders struggled, because we get these requests and bring it to them and say, hey, how would we say this, and they would just, you don't say that, and, oh, well, gee, it sounds good in English, but, what are we supposed, how are we supposed to respond to this? And the struggle that they have, because they want to, they want the language in the school, and they want to help, but dang it's painful to try to do that. And the way that we have finally said, back up and look at the construct that you're talking about and see if it's even something that can be talked about, if it's even a concept within the culture, and if it is, then how is it viewed, and then from that, then you really want to support it, then we can come up with something that's appropriate to say or appropriate to share with the children that would encourage that cultural worldview, and even though it might not sound very good in English, but, I mean, like, I think about the drum groups, Scabby Robe, God, what an impressive group, when we first started our little powwow here, Dad, when those boys were young, he brought them here and was just, wow, really, really good. But you think about, we do go through the same thing with names, or saying, look at that name, Scabby Robe, look what it has brought them. Look what it, how it has helped them, how it's helped that family, how it's a it's an honorable name, but sure don't sound like it in English, and so, because we sometimes get requests of, oh, I want to name my kid Pretty Mountain Flower or something like that, See, well, how about we talk about some of your family names, and then we kind of go back in there, and then we can talk about the people that had those names and what kind of a person they were, and that's who you should, the one that you want this person to be modeled after. That should be included in their name, things like that. Yeah. Well, thanks, Mike. Good to see you. Good to see you. Any others?
I have maybe one additional question if no one else has any. Do you have any funny mistranslations that you like to include in your teaching of, Kootenai to English or vice versa? I don't know. when I talk to Blackfeet speakers, they always talk about the word "usi" for the behind or whatever. I don't know. Sometimes humor can help the teaching process. Do you have any funny pieces?
Yeah, the ones that I used to almost like to go to Dick Little Bear's presentations because, man, he is one jewel. He is one jewel of a language person, and I love that guy. But some of the stuff that he would come up with is was funny and we would kind of say it on the side because it's a lot of it isn't very appropriate for schools or whatever. So, but the name, a lot of the things like what I was talking about with the different words, um, my aunt became a language teacher and she would be teaching it and there's the word for grapes is very close. There's like I was saying, the glottals. A K is said k. It's right. The sound happened right on top of your tongue. That same sound for a Q happens kind of in the back of your throat. Like the difference is that k and that. If you can hear it. I don't know if you can on there or not, but so there's k and k. Now, each of those has a glottal to it also, which means a glottal is when you kind of close off your glottis and then you build up a little bit of pressure and then you see it pops a little bit louder, like a glottal K is, and a glottal Q is. So, and we have those, akupnuk, is the word for a lake, for example, Well, during the language classes, in my aunt's classes, I would always tease her and tell her, oh, well, Pat, tell them to say grapes. And she would, oh, because the word for grapes, there's just a glottal difference between saying grapes or my testicles, so and she would always get upset with me when I would try to get the students to say grapes. Anyway, those kinds of things. That's where the humor in the language teaching comes in. Oh, you got the boss with you, huh? Yeah, you must be Michelle's boss. Anything else? Yes.
I have a question. So you were just talking about the mouth movements for pronunciation for different different sounds. And I know that in the science of reading in English, there is they call it a sound wall, and they have pictures of people making each sound and each movement, and they have it up on the wall for kids to see and copy. So I wanted to know if that's something that you utilize, if you have pictures, or if you take pictures, or if kids do those practice moves in your experience, or is that just I don't know.
Yeah, when we have our language classes, and like I said, pronunciation is important, but that isn't really all of it, So we try to get the correctness the other way, but also in making sure that they are saying things correctly. That we go through the alphabet, the Kootenai alphabet, which has special characters in it, indicating some of the different sounds, like the K and the glottal K and the Q and the glottal Q and and the X and the L, the bar to L, and things like that. So it's I always kind of envy some of the other languages, some of the languages like the Lakota I mean, you can spell it all in English with English characters, but our sounds have some different sounds in there that really can't. But yeah, that's what we do. I'll have a diagram of the side view, a side cut of the whole vocal tract, and then say, okay, this is where if you can feel that sound happening right here on this spot, then you got it. The K, where that happens, the Q, and so, we go through that kind of an explanation with them too, so that they're able to read it correctly, And then with the different accents, like in the Kootenai, the second to the last syllable in any phoneme is where the accent comes in. The word for a cup would be atsu. Atsu. See that second to the last syllable, atsu. But now that's kind of like describing the kind of a bowl shape, but if it's flattened and more spread out, then it's atsunana. So it starts out with atsu, but it's not atsu nana, it's atsunana. Where the concept is the second to the last syllable is where the accent kind of comes in. So yeah, so in explaining all of that kind of stuff and we started there. We would start there with talking about explaining the whole alphabet and going through the whole thing and practicing each of the sounds and going through all of, but now we just started a new group of apprentices, and so the more advanced apprentices are the ones teaching them, and they said, I think it would be a better idea not to start with that. Let's start with some meaning stuff first, and then work on the spelling and pronunciation later on. And there's something to that, because you try to get into the spelling and reading and stuff right off the bat. It kind of limits their trying. They get pretty shy at trying, especially when they hear that the pronunciation is different, and then all the complexities of correct pronunciation, they get afraid to try. So I think it's better that they're starting off with just the verbal part and getting them to do it verbally and all this and that. And then after they're comfortable with doing it, then introducing the alphabet, and then when they start to read and all of those kinds of things, so that they can adjust what they're saying to fit it. But they've already had practice with trying to speak. That's a good idea. This group of advanced apprentices decided on that. But yeah, we've been teaching the alphabet first, So I think we'll see how this works. I think it'll be good though. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any sins else?
Well, Matt passed the baton to me to close out, but yeah, any other questions for Vernon before we end this session? Well, thank you so much, Vernon. It's good to see you again. And thanks to everybody for being on this call and supporting this series. And so the next